It's easy to sort of default to, here's Joe, and Joe has done all these things. Now, Joe, tell us about yourself. Tell us about how you grew up.
Welcome to this episode of Think Like a Producer. Today, I call it a Christine episode, but today we're going to talk about something that's a bit more relevant to people who are interviewing on their podcast. Now, of course, you can have a podcast that's solo. You could just pick up the mic and start talking about whatever you want to talk about. I mean, it's really possible. But most people that we've experienced, most people we work with usually have interview shows. They interview a guest, they talk about a particular topic, they talk about their lives. It can go all over the place. But overall, Christine, mostly, and I get questions about how to be a rock star host. How do you get the best out of the person right in front of you, making sure that not only you two feel super satisfied by the end of the show, but also that anyone listening is getting the most value out of the episode. So we're going to give you some tips here. I'm going to start with listening. The great thing here, I think, for Christina and myself, I think we're both pretty good listeners. I feel like that's pretty much like our superpower at this point. And can you talk real quick?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know why. I was like, I know you're in there, but I know you're not talking, but I was just like, why do I feel like you're not? Okay,
I feel like right when you said that, though, I felt like your mic was hot again. Not like it all of a sudden flipped. It's just like maybe turn it down a little more.
Okay, turning it down now.
I didn't notice it until like the last maybe 5 seconds. Yeah.
It's so interesting.
I'm just as you're more animated, but if you just turn it down a little, you should be fine. Okay. Anyway,
like
on to the first point.
Okay. Number 1, listen more than you talk. The great thing about bringing the best out of someone is that you're really present with what they're saying, with who they are right now. You might have had this picture in your head or, idea what was going to happen, but who they show up right in front of you, it could be a little bit different. So making sure that you're present with the person, you're there with them, you're picking up, it's kind of an LA thing to say, but like picking up on their energy and what they're giving you, and mirroring that back for them so they're comfortable, you're comfortable, but you're really allowing yourself, and Christine's going to talk about, preparation, but you're just allowing yourself to be as present as possible and go with the flow. To me, this is going to get better the more you do interviews, the more relaxed you become, the more questions you ask, which is why on an episode before this, I was like, interview your mom. Like, bring people in that you might know at first when you're starting off as an interview, because you probably have an opportunity to listen a little bit more and be a bit more relaxed until you start to get those really big name guests and everything that you want to have. But Christine, this is really your field of expertise. What's number 2 for our top 5 steps for being a rock star host?
This is one I feel passionate about. Add a value-based question immediately. What do you mean, Christine? I mean, the first question or the first topic you introduce, literally immediately after you introduce your guest, I want it to be adding a lot of value to the listener. So, as we all know, if you've listened to a lot of interview-based shows, it's easy to sort of default to, here's Joe, and Joe has done all these things. Now, Joe, tell us about yourself. Tell us about how you grew up. Unless you are potentially a professional interviewer and have done like thousands upon thousands of hours and know how to really handle that, I would not start there. Instead, I would say, here's Joe. These are the highlights of what Joe's done that's relevant to this audience. And then say, Joe, one of the most fascinating things I've seen in your work is XXX. Tell me what people need to understand about that. Or, okay, it's not like a script I'm giving you. I'm just saying, do you see the difference? Where immediately the first topic covered in the episode is a really big value add. Something where you've given just enough context so people can understand where this person's coming from. And then you immediately kind of go to the sweet spot of what the intersection is between the audience's interests and this person's expertise. Now, I feel the same way about IG Lives. Tiff and I just talked about this. I think we've become used to sort of this very informal chit chat, hey guys, what's up kind of culture around conversing with our audiences. But for most content, it's not going to work. It's not going to be powerful. You feel like you're wasting the audience's time. They really don't need to know all of that little chitter chatter. It's almost like people use that as a crutch to then get into the goods. Now, honest to goodness, most of the best content usually comes in the second half of an interview, just because the rapport and the energy and the context has been built by that point. But if you can start with a really thoughtful question that adds a lot of value and allows your guest to add a lot of value right from the beginning, everything will go better. And you'll get to the really good stuff sooner. If you use the crutch of like, I don't know what to say, I'm not sure yet, I just want them to talk, like, just tell me about yourself. Like, it's not, 99% of the time, it's not going to be a good start. So ask a value add question from the beginning. That's my second tip. Tiff, what's tip number 3?
Research, research, research. Now, it's interesting to me, some people, after a while, if you get to know someone, you might be able to have a really cool, candid conversation. Like Christine said, it's just sort of what we're used to sometimes when people have a very, very conversational interview. That's what I want to say. But overall, especially as you prepare for bigger guests, for people you don't know, researching them and understanding who they are and how they're relevant to your audience is really going to help, especially in the introduction, right? This is really where we can pretty much tell whether or not this person is well researched or not. If you are able to give the entire bio, not the from the website bio, but you're able to describe the person you're about to interview for your audience and how they're relevant to your audience, it's really going to show not only the person that you're interviewing that you care, that took the time to research, but the fact that you took the time to put it in your own words, making sure they're even established on what you're going to talk about now for this audience, what's most relevant. Maybe you don't need to talk about everything in their life. Maybe just this one particular part is what's going to resonate most for your audience, going to be best for this interview. It's going to bring the most value to the people that are listening. So please, we urge you, research the person, make sure that you're able to describe who they are and what they do for your audience, not just for the episode itself, but here's like another just sort of bonus tip for the marketing. If you're able to capture who this person is and what they do for the audience in 15 seconds of your 60-second promo video, you're going to get people in there immediately and a lot quicker than if it has to be this very long kind of drawn out explanation, or if you ask the person that you're interviewing to introduce themselves, right? So that's it. I can definitely sit on my soapbox about research. But Christine, number 4, what would you say to everyone about being a rock star host?
This one is something we've seen firsthand be super powerful, and I'll just give the shout out to our former client, Lewis Howes, because he's really awesome at this. And it's preparing your guest before the interview starts and connecting with them on a very personal, kind of intuitive level. So what I mean is, before the interview starts, right, kind of that meet and greet period where the person's arrived, whether in person or digitally, it doesn't matter. You're sitting, chatting before you hit record. You want to consistently and very consciously make sure that that guest feels like their boundaries are going to be honored, that they're seen, that they're heard, that they're valued, that you understand where they're coming from. So questions like, hey, I'm so excited to talk about this blah, blah, blah today. I love your work. Is there anything off limits that you don't want to get into today? Is there anything you are really passionate about that's exciting that we need to cover? What are what's something new that you've been really interested in that you'd like to discuss? These kinds of questions signal to the guest like, oh, this person is genuinely interested in me and what I'm doing and wanting to promote that and protect me from any kind of like unwanted attention or, kind of weird like gotcha questions. And that can go a really long way to make sure the guest feels safe subconsciously, that they can be vulnerable and open up and share powerful things that they might not share in other shows that are a little bit more either, cut and dry and formal and impersonal, or that they can tell this person doesn't even know anything about me. They read my bio 5 minutes ago and they haven't really prepared. So preparing your guest is kind of part 1 of that. Now, included with that and kind of what carries into the rest of the interview is connecting with them on an energetic level. Tiff mentioned we might get a little, LA talk in here, but the truth is, I think we can all agree, we can feel the energy of someone, and it doesn't take that much work to kind of tune in and feel like, does this person feel like they're outgoing, extroverted, vibrant, vivacious, open? Are they feeling like maybe they're a little reserved, a little guarded? Do they seem like they're maybe a little down, like maybe they're not feeling super well? Do they seem preoccupied? This kind of emotional intelligence on a basic level, I know you have it in you. You know you have it in you. But really tapping into that consciously right before you start the interview, as well as kind of the beginning stages, and meeting your guest where they're at. I've talked to clients about this several times, and they know exactly what I'm talking about once they've done a few interviews. But you might even know your guest, right? You might actually already have a relationship with them. But if you expect them to be in performance mode and you're ignoring the signs that they're actually a little off today, or that they might be a little stressed or flustered, or they might have been rushing in from something, they got caught in traffic, it's really important to note that and just pause and meet them where they're at. If you need to kind of subdue yourself a little bit and kind of just bring in some peaceful energy, or if they are just live wire, flying high, all energy, lift it to meet them and bring in all that from the beginning and let that kind of amplify. It can vary and shift throughout the interview. So that's why I say notice at the beginning and meet them, but then as the interview progresses, like go with them where it goes, right? If they open up in a really vulnerable space, maybe even, shed some tears or kind of have a moment, go there with them. Create the space, hold it, let them know that they're safe and that you understand, and your, empathy, these basic emotional intelligence skills we've learned a lot about the last few years kind of in the mainstream. Those make a huge difference, and it will really bring the best out of your guest.
Ooh, can I say something on that real quick?
Please, Tiff. Please come on in.
It's okay to pause and think. As Christine shouted out Lewis Howes, what I really loved about his process was that he was not afraid to pause during an episode to think about what he was going to say next. And that kind of also goes into the listening part that we were talking about. But we've had people submit that to his podcast and say, wow, I love that you guys let the guests think about it, or that Lewis kind of takes his time before he asks the next question because he's so present with the person who's right in front of them. So just putting that out there, I think, sticking to a certain timeline, trying to make sure, you're hitting 30 minutes or an hour, or, your guest might have limited time. There's a lot of different factors that can come in, but be okay with taking a pause, thinking about your next question, and really being present with the person, and don't feel like you have to fill in the space, because that's what editing is for. So just putting that little bonus tip out there, and I'll let the expert Christine continue to give you step 5.
Well, clearly you're also an expert. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's absolutely powerful. And it really puts your guest at ease because they realize it's okay for them to pause too. So leading the way, setting the pace. Now, like I said, some people, they're going to start talking and never stop. And listening won't be the problem. You won't even be able to get a word in edgewise. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, yes, you need to, facilitate a conversation, but you got to meet the person where they're at. So tip number 5 is, I didn't look at my notes. Hold on.
Ask how you can support them at the end.
So tip number 5 is once the interview is complete, and I know it's easy to overlook this because you're like, what do you mean? Like, the interview's done. How are you still being a great host at that point? Well, actually, if you end the interview and you stick around for a minute, like you probably do, and say thank you so much, gratitude, acknowledgement, any housekeeping items that may have come up, it's also really powerful to ask the guest how you can support them. So it's pretty natural most of the time, probably towards the end of the interview or some point during the conversation, you've talked about what they're up to, right? Like, that's probably why you have them on the show, because they're up to something. So you've probably already touched on their project or their book or their course or like the thing they're up to, but never take for granted that that's what they need support with. It's very powerful once you finish the episode, thank them for their time, to then say, how can I support you? And honestly, just leave it out there and let them respond however they will. Some people might be taken off guard because they're not used to being asked that, but it's really powerful. And oftentimes you might be surprised at the answer. If they might say like, wow, thank you so much. Well, I've got this thing coming out. So like, if you want to share it, I mean, that's totally normal. And that's like but sometimes they might surprise you and say something like, Well, actually, I've been looking for someone who's an expert in this, or I have this trip coming up and I'm going to be in this city and I'm hoping to connect with someone about this. Do you know anyone? It might be something like, hey, I've really loved what you did with your setup today. Like, can you connect me with your X, Y, or Z, right? Producer, editor. What kind of equipment was this? What's this platform? It might actually be a question about the experience you created. It could be anything. You don't know till you ask. So that's the tip number 5. Be sure to ask. Of course, sometimes, you may just have no time left and they've got to run. So you may do this in a follow-up text or email. But hopefully, ideally, you have the time, you say your thank yous, and then you say, how can I support you? I want to support you. What have you got going on? And listen to the answer and obviously follow through with what they ask, whatever you can offer, even if it's just your time, your energy, promoting them. That makes a really beautiful impact on the guest as kind of like a bow on top to the whole experience. And it really helps you stand out as someone who genuinely wanted to support them, which, as we all know, goes a long way in today's world. It's not just empty words, and that's a way to be quite truly a rockstar host. So, Tiff, any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
I mean, I think, we already said it, but just give yourself some grace, especially when you're starting out. If you're new, what I like to suggest to people is to have an interview solo pattern of a show. The more you practice, getting to the beginning, middle, and end, and having a good, valuable show by yourself, I think it's also helps when you have someone in front of you when you're talking about a particular topic. The more you practice at any of this, the better you get. Christine has seen me not be able to get through an entire episode sometimes just trying to practice at hosting, and we pass the mic back and forth to each other. We're learning as we go as well. And so I just want to make sure that I bring that up to people. We know a lot. We've been in the industry for a long time, but to be in front of the camera, to be in front of the mic can be an intimidating place. So this is just, Tiff's little encouragement corner, to give yourself some grace. Practice. Maybe start out with some people who you know already and move into new guests and new people you haven't heard of before. And maybe the last bonus tip I'll give too, no one says that this has to be the only time you interviewed that person. So, we've worked on plenty of shows where people have come back and had a follow up, or, they've done something different. They're promoting something else and they need to get on podcasts and do their little podcast tour and go around to different people. So maybe also don't feel like you have to get everything out in that interview and that you have to ask every question, that burning question. Give yourself almost that confidence in yourself that you'll be able to bring this person back because they've had such a good interview with you right now. They'd be willing to come back in 6 months or a year and talk more about a different topic or the same topic even further. Those are my last couple of tips there. Any piggybacking off of that?
It. That was an excellent bonus tip. I'm so glad you
Mm.
shared. All right. Thank you so much for listening or watching to this episode. We want to hear your questions, so please continue to send them in. Follow us at Think Like a Producer on Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening platform. Definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. We absolutely love it when you leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. It super helps us with understanding what you want and what you enjoy about the show, but also in helping other people find the show because it gives a lot of credibility. So thank you in advance for leaving us a rating and review, and we will see you next time on Think Like a Producer.